Hello and welcome to TMI with Aldous Tyler for Friday, January 29th, 2021. One of the things that we've been talking about a lot lately, of course, happens to be how the Democratic Party has a unique opportunity, given that they have barely control of the Senate, nice, still decent control of the House, and of course the presidency, that they can actually get stuff done. But we know historically, this has not been their strong suit. Now, Carl Gibson, friend of the show, over at ClassWarDaily, has been publishing on this topic, amongst others. And so I decided, you know what? Time to bring it back on. Let's have a discussion. Carl, welcome to TMI.
Thanks for having me again, Aldous. Always good to be here.
Absolutely. So, as the a recent TBS game show says, go big or go home. I believe that is the advice that we're at least pretty sure the Democrats should be adhering to at this time, right?
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm far from the only voice doing that. I think there's a growing chorus among progressives, Bernie Sanders, AOC, are all kind of pressuring the Biden administration to really get aggressive with the COVID stimulus, with the bailout for the working class, if you will. There's a lot of people who are really hurting right now, and Democrats for the first time in a decade have unified control of the White House and both houses of Congress. And so we all know that doesn't happen very often. So hopefully they don't squander it.
Or at least it certainly hasn't happened very often in the past 30 years or so.
Right.
Now, I believe there is some lessons to be had from history here. The last time this happened was 2009, if I'm not mistaken.
Exactly. That was the beginning of the Obama administration. And as we all know, there was a similar situation where Democrats had the White House and both houses of Congress. The Senate, they not only had a majority, they had almost 60 votes. There was a little bit of a hold-up seating Al Franken because Norm Coleman was contesting in Minnesota.
Right.
But the Democrats had majorities in both houses of Congress. And we all saw what happened in 2017 when the Republicans had a smaller majority. The attitude was, elections have consequences. The American people voted for us, and we're going to enact our agenda. And you guys are welcome to oppose us, but we're going to steamroll it on through. And that was where you saw the attempted repeal of Obamacare, the tax cuts for the rich, the appointment of right-wing federal judges. You know, there was just there was so much that they did with their power. In 2009, Democrats did the exact opposite. They sought unity. They tried to reach across the aisle, be bipartisan, et cetera, et cetera. In the meantime, a lot of people were waiting for some kind of meaningful stimulus. And instead, what Obama delivered was the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, which Paul Krugman correctly predicted would be a half measure that wouldn't even make a dent in unemployment and productivity and output and all that. So by the time 2010 came around, people still hadn't recovered from the recession, and the Republicans rode that populist anger, however disingenuously, to take a majority in the House. And the rest is history. Obama couldn't get anything else done the rest of his time in office.
Well, and the thing is, so the Democratic Party has long been self-styled as being the party that will help the people out, the party that will make sure that government's working for the people, et cetera. That's their self-styling. That's their branding. I'm not going to, at the moment, get into how I dispute that. However, point being is that's what they want to call themselves. And what happens, of course, is then they get into office after making their usually lofty promises. Even Biden had some fairly lofty ones this past election cycle. And then they begin to go, well, okay, but to accomplish that, we really should consider this, and we should make sure to exclude these kind of people from that. And we want to make sure that we are keeping businesses in mind. So we do this and that. And so here's the thing, Carl. Anytime anybody comes up to you and says, hey, look, I'm going to help you out, I'm going to give you whatever, and you go, that's great. And then you go up to them a few minutes later, go, okay, cool, I'm ready for that. And they go, well, let's first consider this, and maybe we should do that. The first thing that comes to people's mind is, this guy isn't going to help you. He's completely lying to you. It makes the Democratic Party look like that guy that promises the moon and never even gives you a pebble.
Yeah, it's like a bad boxing promoter. It's like, oh, these guys are going to go at it. It's going to be great. It's going to be a 10-round slugfest. And, you get there and it's two 80-year-olds like, pushing each other in the chest. Right. And so $2,000 on January 5th in Georgia, when both Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff were joining Joe Biden, who they were saying, we're going to get $2,000 checks out the door immediately. All of a sudden that became $1,400. And some technocrats in the Biden administration said, well, we gave you $600. So technically we're not lying. I don't care. You said $2,000 checks. We want $2,000 checks. You guaranteed, and that's one example. You guaranteed us rental assistance, eviction moratorium, help for struggling businesses, and these people are all waiting. Biden's been in office now for over a week. The Democrats have had a majority for over a week. We all know what would happen if Trump got reelected and he had majorities in both houses of Congress. There'd be another tax cut for the rich on the floor getting a vote right now.
Oh, yes.
So I hope, and I think it's still possible that Biden is playing a game with the Republicans and saying, I want everyone to see how disingenuous and full of shit these people are. So now I can finally do something that is, not popular with the Republicans, but that will help people. And then that will put them on the outs to the midterms.
I can only hope so.
He was there for 8 years and watched them obstruct all of Obama's agenda. So he knows who they are. So either he's really stupid or he's playing politics, which he's been a professional politician for 40 plus years. So he knows how to do that.
But Carl, these are my longtime friends. No, but seriously, the problem that a lot of people have too is, again, they're well aware that Biden was in the Senate for decades and that these are his friends, and that I believe that without seeing decisive motion from him, they're pretty much afraid that he's just going to be basically playing softball with his buddies rather than actually accomplishing what he needs to accomplish. Now, one thing I've seen, which gives me some hope, is the selection of Deb Haaland to be the Secretary of the Interior, because that is not only the first Native American to be on a cabinet post for a president, which is great. That's your identity optics, if you will. That's fine. But the Secretary of the Interior is a very important post to Native tribes because it is in charge of the Bureau of Indian Education, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Bureau of Land Management, and it ultimately has an awful lot to do with whether or not pipelines get approved through native lands and things like that. And by having someone who is tribal from the Pueblo Indians in that position, it gives Biden kind of this interesting thing where he can say, oh, shucks, guys, I'm not the hardball, but you know what? You're going to have to talk to Deb over here.
Yeah, and that gives him cover. I think Deb Haaland's a great hire. I think Biden's made a lot of great hires. Janet Yellen at Treasury, like she's not Elizabeth Warren, but she's definitely not like a Wall Street guy, right? I think there's a lot of room to say that Biden is already doing a lot more in his first few days than Obama did when he was in office, given his appointments, given the executive orders he's signing. So, I'm not willing to cut the floor out from under Biden just yet. But I do think it's time. I do think it's time for people who are eager that Trump is out of office and eager to get things done. Now's the time to start calling our senators. Democrats have the majority, and they're not going to decide to do the right thing on their own. Anytime any progress is won, especially in the federal government and Congress, is only because people exerted overwhelming pressure to make it happen.
Historically, the Democrats just don't do it unless they absolutely have pressure. That's for sure.
Yeah. And FDR even said, as progressive as FDR was, he said, make me do it. They need that pressure from us to do the things that we elected them to do. They're not just going to do it because they feel like it. And they have people in their ear, wealthy lobbyists, hire lawyers to send people to their offices day in and day out and push for things. So we don't have that. All we have is the power of the email and the phone and the tweet. And we have to exert all of that power to make them bend to our will. And they have before, so we can make them do it again.
Send a postal letter or two if you feel like it.
Right, send them a letter. But like 15 an hour, right? Like in 2012, that was a pipe dream. They said that would never happen. You might get $10 an hour 5 years from now. Now 15 an hour happened in so many cities and states that now Congress is finally getting on board and saying, hey, let's do 15 an hour. Actually, I have a piece out in Barron's, the financial magazine, about why 15 an hour is not enough and it needs to be 25 an hour by 2025.
Oh, yes.
And that's a separate conversation. But it just goes to show the Dems are susceptible to pressure more than the Republicans would ever be. And so, yes, they're not allies of the working class. Yes, they're enemies of social movements, but they are susceptible to pressure. And that's the most important thing to remember.
Absolutely. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking to Carl Gibson. You can find him every day over at ClassWarDaily. It's ClassWarDaily.com, right?
Exactly.
All right. And as he said, you can find him on Barron's recently. And generally speaking, you're publishing stuff that I'm pretty sure my listeners would be highly interested in. After all, that's why I keep having you back. But to be clear, though, one of the things that caught my attention was that former President Trump isn't waiting. He isn't sitting idle. He set up the Office of Former Presidency in Florida to carry out his agenda as best he can to keep his movement going and probably to keep the donations rolling in to cover his expenses. But the point is this: if you think Trumpism is dead, think again. We have to take this opportunity right now because that boogeyman is ready to come roaring back.
Yeah, and I think also him losing his Twitter account was just a bridge too far, right? I think he finally found a way to post to Twitter. Like he'll get his lemmings in the media to post the statements from the office of the former president to Twitter, and that's a way to get around it. But yeah, he's a cult leader. He's not a typical politician. He has a very, very devout following, way more than any Democrat, even Bernie Sanders ever had. So I think it's a very dangerous moment. Yes, we got rid of a fascist. He's not in the White House anymore, and that's great. But this impeachment trial that's coming up is really important. I don't think the Republicans are going to convict. They need 16. I don't think they're going to do it. But I think at least the Dems, being in the majority, can call witnesses. They can subpoena people to come up and testify, talking about this fascist element within the Republican Party, not just Trump, but the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and the Lauren Boeberts, how they're all really complicit in terrorism and violence and sedition. And that's a really important conversation to have if we want to avoid something like Trump happening in the future.
Well, and part of the problem is that in asking Republican senators to go along with a vote of conviction for impeachment and removal, and of course, all of the goodies that come along with that, such as cutting Trump's after presidential salary and ensuring he can't run for federal office again, things like that. If they vote that way, that then actually in a lot of ways to them, I'm sure, ties them into being guilty for being part of this whole thing, because they were Republican senators during Trump's tenure, most of them at least. And so that basically to them, I think, feels like a very dangerous vote to make. So I'm with you. I don't think it's going to happen. I really wish it would. For a number of reasons, and not just because I'm being vindictive at Trump. I am, by the way. I fully admit that. I want that bastard to feel everything he has coming to him. But the fact is, I don't think politically they're going to see it as a good move because, again, it's going to kind of put the dot on the I and the cross on the T when it comes to their own complicity.
Well, and, they really told on themselves when they talked about how on Fox News, they said Biden's inauguration speech was divisive. And I think CNN or someone interviewed a Texas Republican who said Biden needs to stop being so divisive. We all heard his inauguration speech. It was all about unity and coming together. He said we need to unite against these elements that are destroying our country, like white supremacy. And so by telling on themselves and saying, oh, Biden's targeting white supremacists is terrible, they're admitting that that's a big part of their base.
Oh, yeah.
I would not like to be a Republican senator right now, to be clear, because it's a lose-lose. If you vote for conviction, you're labeled a never Trumper and you're going to get voted out of office. If you don't vote for conviction, you are permanently tying your legacy for all of history to a seditious, dangerous fascist administration. And that's how your children and your grandchildren and their grandchildren will remember you. So it's a lose-lose for them,
Oh, absolutely. So, Carl, let me transition a moment because one of the things that I always love about activism on the left is that we don't limit ourselves to electoral politics. I mean, yeah, we want to make sure the politicians are doing what they promised. We want to make sure that they are doing everything they possibly can to reflect the needs of the people and not the needs of the corporations, et cetera. But we're perfectly good with taking direct action against the those who would oppose the needs of the people. And just recently, I believe we're talking about and again, this is coming out on Friday and such. Just last week, it was that AMC stock got artificially inflated, much to the consternation of some folks. Wasn't that correct?
Yeah, they started with GameStop, and that was typically in Wall Street, hedge funds will have a business model called shorting stocks. And what that basically boils down to, there's a lot of technical gibberish, but what it boils down to is they make bets that a company's stock, usually a struggling business, will plummet and it will never go above a certain amount. They borrow those shares, they sell them for cash, they make money that those shares won't go above a certain price, then they sell them off and then they pocket the difference. What happened with GameStop was they shorted it and bet that it wouldn't go up above, I think it was trading at $17 earlier this month. And what happened was Reddit, which is of course full of gamers, and gamers love a challenge, right? So what they did was say, nope, not having that. And they all collectively bought shares of GameStop, speculating it up to over $325 a share as of Tuesday. And so that's about a 1,900% increase in price over about a 3-week period, which is just unheard of in the stock market. So one particular hedge fund, Melvin Capital, is expected to file for bankruptcy in the next week. Other hedge funds that are shorting other stocks are possibly on the chopping block. So AMC, like you mentioned, the movie theater chain, they're I think they were targeted by one of these hedge funds. And so Reddit started a campaign to buy up their stock, just as an experiment, just to see. I'm not doing this to make money. I downloaded the Robinhood app on my phone, which is for retail investors. And I put $100 on my Robinhood account and I bought AMC stock with it. And by the end of, that was Wednesday morning. By the end of the day, Wednesday, my $100 had become $121.80. So right.
That's a good investment, sir.
Exactly. Now, I'm not going to sell and I'm not going to buy any more stock. This is just kind of an experiment to see, okay, if I buy a worthless stock, no one's going to the movies right now. No one will for a while. If I buy a worthless piece of stock in a movie theater chain, when Reddit is artificially inflating its price, will I make money? And the answer is yes. I'm undefeated at stonks right now. The only stock I've ever bought is just going through the roof. I'm a great stonk buyer. I'm a buyer of stonks.
Well, here's the thing, Carl. You know what signs to look for in the market, right?
Well, I'm great at posting. That's my real skill. And so, I recognize game, and it was way too late to get on the GameStop train. I don't have $300 per share to shell out. But GameStop, when I bought it, was trading at like $14. And then by the end of the day, it was like almost 20. Who knows what's going to happen with it? I fully expect at some point there will be a breaking point, right? Like people will say, okay, it's way too high. I have way too many shares. This is not sustainable. They're going to sell. And then that will trigger a massive sell-off. And then everyone else will either make money or lose their shares. So I'm not expecting to make money off of my $100, but it's interesting to see how there's a real-time transfer of wealth from the investor class to the working class because of posting on Reddit.
Well, the funny thing is they don't like it. The investor class does not like that one bit and actually froze trading on it partway through the day on Wednesday to try and recoup what basically try to get some control over what was happening. And I'm like, isn't this supposed to be the bastion of the free market here on Wall Street? What's going on with that? Well,
the poorest started making money in their rigged casino, and they weren't abiding by that. I don't think Reddit is going to go down without a fight. They're actually, and I think Wednesday was one of the worst days for Wall Street since October. The Dow was down 500 points by the end of trading. Yet the big stocks that were surging were GameStop, AMC Theaters, Blockbuster, Nokia, makers of the Nokia brick phone that we all had in high school, and BlackBerry. So those were the stocks that were doing really well. Everyone else had a terrible day on Wednesday. I don't know how long this will last, but I think what did happen, the main lesson from this is that Reddit proved that the stock market is fake and the financialization of the economy is totally fake and it doesn't mean anything. And it's a terrible way to measure the economy. And so I think that's the real lesson to learn, right? And my $100 will be zero eventually. But I think it was really interesting to see the level of stress that buying $100 worth of stock causes in order for me to just make enough money to get a bucket of chicken from KFC, right? Like,
yeah, no kidding.
It's kind of wild, that world, and a lot of people live in that world and it makes them do crazy things. Like, for example, shorting the credit rating of a third world country, driving their credit rating into the ground and making billions off of it. Wall Street has done what Reddit did for the last week. Wall Street's done that for decades, and they've ruined jobs and retirements and economies. So the fact that they're now crying for regulations because poor people are making money, it just shows how fake this whole thing was in the first place.
Oh, yes. No, Wall Street set up by the quote unquote investor class, invented the investor class, and wanted to make sure that your money could make you money if you had money. But if you didn't have money, just stay away. This isn't for you, was the whole idea. And basically, we proved that that's not going to be acceptable anymore. We're not going to take it. We're going to make sure that if you're playing those kind of games, we're calling you on it, and we're going to prove it.
Yeah, and it's also a huge, remarkable kind of contrast where David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler, the two Republican senators who got voted out in Georgia this month, they were able to make stock trades based on classified secret knowledge they got from Senate briefings about COVID, and nothing happened. To where now the SEC is issuing statements saying they're monitoring irregular market activity. Like, okay, so the rules only apply to poor people. Like, that's what that means. And that's a major indicator that the financial markets are a really risky, unnecessary, burdensome part of the economy that never needed to exist in the first place. Big companies and, tech entrepreneurs, if they want to raise some capital to do something, you'll have an IPO. But I think there's so much sickness in the economy and a capitalist system to where things can be made so volatile by people on the internet just having fun.
Absolutely. All right. Again, ladies and gentlemen, we've had Carl Gibson here as our guest today. Again, you can check him out every day, ClassWarDaily.com. I would encourage you to. I check it out, and you can even get that sent to your inbox so you know what's going on. But Carl, thank you so much for coming by and making sure we understood both what the Biden administration and the Democrats in general that are in power need to do to actually serve the will of the people and perhaps stay in power for a change, as well as going over what direct action can do to illustrate the complete farce that is the stock market.
Thanks again for having me, Aldous. It's always great to be here. And looking forward to the next one.
Absolutely. You've been watching TMI with Aldous Tyler. We'll be back.